When you look at these images, you instantly know that you're looking at something real. What elements, characteristics, combinations of surfaces, angles, edges, light, and shadows tell you that you're looking at something real? As modelers, we attempt to create a miniature representation of these real subjects with various degrees of success. Welcome to Scale Model Workshop. When you saw the images in the opening of this video, it was obvious that each one was of something real. One of the main visual cues was that you could actually distinguish each of their multitude of individual parts. The demarcation between each was sharp and distinct. In this episode, I want to step into the shadows and see how we can bring that quality to our models. To illustrate the function of shadows, let's take a look at a bolt head detail that we might want to create when we're going all out on that magnum opus scratch-built project. The bolt head's machined from brass rod stock and pressed fit to place. The results are prototypical separation between the bolt head and the surface. Compare this with the more familiar details that are supplied in the molded kit. In this case, the bolt head detail is one with the surface. Not only is there no separation between the two, there's typically a very slight fillet at the base of the detail, which is inherent with the molding process. This fillet only grows as the model's painted. Plastic bolt heads that are glued to place typically have an even larger fillet due to the buildup of cement at the joint. Looking down on the molded detail, you can see that it presents a rather flat appearance. In an attempt to create a visual separation, many modelers apply a dark-colored wash at the base of the detail. While this does create a contrast in the color with the top of the bolt head, the result has little basis in reality. Adding a wash around the detail results in what looks more like oil stain around the base and up the side of the bolt head rather than a shadow that would be cast from a light source. In contrast, the bolt head that's press fit to place maintains a good visual separation between the detail and the surface. No artificial enhancements necessary. Any shadows around the base of the detail can be left to a realistic point source of light. This brings up another important visual element. Shadows move with the direction of the light source and the viewing angle. Advocates of washes and pre-shading defend the effect by citing its use in art. While that's true, they fail to draw an important distinction between a painting and a model. The painting's 2D and the model's 3D. The painting is a static scene where the artist establishes the light source. If you want to use an artistic analogy, you'd have to say that the model's akin to a sculpture. A model treated with heavy pre-shading and overly dark washes can easily take on a nondescript look as the static artificial effects move with the model. Rather than a painted-on approach, I'd like to take a look at some simple construction techniques that help enhance the sense of separate details. For these examples, I'll be using the construction of the armor models that I'm working on for my display, the top tanks of World War II, that I talked about in the previous video, Tale of Two Turrets. What makes this so apropos is that none of this requires any special tools, exotic techniques, or aftermarket bits. Only that you slow down and focus on enjoying the process and progress as you use your inherent modeling skills to build something that you're happy with. The first simple example is an illustration of the shadow effect around raised detail. This is the driver's hatch of a Dragon T-34. Straight from the sprue it looks like this. If you're in a habit of cementing parts this way, you can see how the cement further softens the definition between the glacis plate and the hatch, almost creating a welded-on look. On the other hand, adding a slight radius to the base of the detail and taking the time to cement details from the underside takes advantage of the hatch being a separate part, resulting in much more definition and an actual sense of separation. In addition to raised details, separate parts are also brought together in a flush arrangement, as with panels, hatches, and doors. Look at this radiator on the T-34 model right out of the box. The space between the parts is very uneven due to a number of little things. Very minor flash along the upper edge of the opening, as well as less than optimal fit between the parts. The first step is to clean up the opening for the grill by removing the flash and establishing a consistent edge around the opening. I like to use a fine file for this task because it's easier to straighten out any imperfections. I finish up with a blade and scuff pad to remove any errant burrs. The edge of the grill is cleaned up by careful sanding against a block. Here the bulk of the pressure is applied at the center of the grill, balancing the force with equal strokes in both directions, so you get an equal removal of material along the length of the grill. I use a blade, fine sandpaper on a block, and a scuff pad to remove any burrs along the edge. This is the result of the cleanup and a little Mr. Surfacer 500 on the corner of the grill to make up for the original deficiency. Looking at the before and after, you can see that a little strategic cleanup results in a more consistent separation between the grill and the hull. Very narrow separations like this always seem to be a magnet for debris, and because the gap's so deep, it can be difficult to remove. What I've found extremely useful is to mount a piece of very thin shim material in an X-Acto handle. Here I've used a piece of 1,500 stainless that I've cut at a fairly flat angle to help keep the tip from bending quite so easily. Minding the gap, not that gap, but the gap between parts, can be even peskier when you have several panels side by side and the gaps need to be equal. Or even worse, when kit manufacturers decide to just open one hatch and the gap needs to match an adjacent perfectly molded spacing like this. These are the perfect little opportunities to either use the skills you already have or develop a strategy and new skills to make an improvement and create a satisfying result. Building the rear hull of this T-34 model 1941 is a good example that brings a number of modeling techniques together. The heavy bolted construction makes for a great visualization of the shadows that can be created between and around all the raised detail in separate parts. Here's how the rear hatch door on the Dragon T-34 1941 fits right off the sprue. You can see a pretty fair gap on the hinge side, and no space anywhere else. In reality, the door should have a pretty close fit that's equal all the way around. This would mean moving the door closer to the hinges, adding some material to the top of the door, and removing a bit of material from either side. A simpler but less prototypical approach to equal out the spacings to move the door halfway towards the hinges, opening a gap on the top and bottom, and then removing enough material from either side to create an equal space. Following on with what I talked about in the Tale of Two Turrets video, I didn't want to get bogged down in the minutiae, so I went with the second approach, and in doing it this way also makes for a good example of technique. When making these sorts of adjustments, you don't want to sand this way because you can't control the pressure. This method usually results in creating a slight radius. It's much better to sand in this direction. Here you can control the force and maintain a straight edge, or if you need to correct an angle, you can easily monitor how much and from where the material is being removed. If you want to use this method, you should have a sanding surface that's straight and flat. I show how to make your own custom sanding blocks in this earlier video. Here the rear of the T-3441 is basically complete. Note the crisp separations between the movable parts and the natural shadows under the raised structures that are cemented on and around those that are molded. One final note. Cementing details from the backside can seem like a no-brainer, but it's important that you don't get too cavalier with how you handle the cement. It's very easy to apply too much cement and have it run out the other side of the joint, mucking everything up just as bad or worse if you had applied it from the outside. For most of my general plastic model construction, I use Tamiya extra thin cement. It's designed to be applied onto the joint between two parts and find its way between through capillary action, and it does this quite well, but in some instances too well. Tamiya makes a number of different cements, and I've found that using one of their thicker cements actually handles better when I'm cementing parts from the backside. My personal favorite is their white cap cement, but for some reason it doesn't seem to get imported into the U.S. Here we commonly see Tamiya orange cap cement. I don't think they're the same, although they handle in a similar manner. Both are meant to be applied to the mating surfaces prior to putting the parts together. They give you more working time to make minor adjustments, but they add a thickness of cement. Here I'm applying streaks of Tamiya Extra Thin and Tamiya Orange Cap cements to a glass slab. After a short bit you can see there's no evidence of the Extra Thin, while you can see a definite buildup of the Orange Cap cement. For this reason I don't often use the thicker cements right out of the bottle. So I have a bottle of Extra Thin that I've added about 10% white cap to retard the volatility and reduce the flow. And I have a bottle of white cap mixed with about 20% Extra Thin to improve the flow, reduce the layer thickness, as well as add solvent power. The brush in the white cap cement is the same large brush found in the orange cap, and it's too large for most of what I use these mixtures for. So I've swapped it out for the fine tip brush from a bottle of Extra Thin. If you do this, be careful because the white cap cement's much thicker, and a fair amount of cement will remain on the stem of the applicator only to run off where you don't want it. So I always make sure I dab off the stem before taking the cement to the model. One technique that I use to make sure that I'm not applying too much cement to an inside joint is to put the brush down shy of the joint and then work the brush into the joint. It's much easier to visualize the amount and flow of the cement. I hope some of the concepts in this video have proved a bit thought-provoking, and some of these simple techniques worth a try, and maybe inspire you to develop a few tricks of your own. So long for now, and I'll see you next time.